Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Get in the Herd After Hours. After Hours. I'm your host, Alex Bond. I am a staff member here at the McShin Foundation, reporting live from my office. More importantly, I am a person in recovery from a substance use disorder, which means that for the last over 15 months, I've not found the need to put any mood or mind-altering substances in my body. And, found a footing in this new community that has welcomed me so graciously. I'm here with my two lovely guests, Jesse and Angela. How are y'all doing today?
Doing good.
We're doing well. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Very happy to have you. So, Jesse, start off. Why don't you introduce yourself to everyone who might not know you?
Well, according to you, you can just Google me and that'll take care of everything.
Straight up.
Yeah.
Y'all do the work.
My name's Jesse Heffernan. I'm a person in long-term substance use and mental health recovery. I just celebrated 20 years on the 21st of January. So half my life in recovery so far, and it's certainly caused, there's constant evaluation and constant looking at like, well, what does recovery mean? Because by all definitions, like it's certainly not about substances anymore, right? So it's about maintenance. It's about looking at other deeper things. It's about looking at the stuff between the lines. And so I'm grateful to be able to be in a space to do that. I'm a recovery coach professional with CCAR. I co-own a business called Helios Recovery Services, where we train recovery coaches and provide technical assistance and consulting to states and agencies, and really just focus in on building that recovery capital and recovery capacity within organizations, and make sure that we're and just to start it off, like it's not about us just being at the table. It's about us claiming that we actually have our own table. And that's the way change happens. So,
yeah, that's what we talk about on here all the time. Is how do we get a seat at the table when it's kind of about building our own table. So I'm really interested to pick your brain a little bit, Jesse. I'm very happy to have you on. Angela, why don't you introduce yourself to those who might not know you?
Hi, so I'm Angela Mallette, and I'm a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorder, and I have not used any mind-altering substances or alcohol since February of 2016. So in just a few days, we're coming up on 5 years, so that's an exciting milestone. So professionally, I am the director of outreach for an organization called End It for Good, and we work on drug policy reform and educating people and communicating the harms of the war on drugs, and then invitationally inviting people, even people we know who fundamentally can't get on board with us and zoom out and look at these ideas. We invite them to the table, because that's the only way change is going to happen, is if we start these conversations in places where they don't want to have them. So in a place like Mississippi, to be talking about harm reduction and decriminalization and a legalized and regulated substance market, what would that look like can be challenging. But if we can do it here, then I feel like it can be done across the board.
Awesome. So Mississippi and Wisconsin in the house. Very excited to talk about harm reduction with you. So I want to jump in with some softballs. There's some language that some of our viewers might not know or understand. I personally know what recovery capital is, but I'd like Jesse to explain what he means by helping people kind of assess recovery capital and gain recovery capital. Can you actually explain that to our audience, what that means?
Sure. There's two routes. One is like the capital of recovery itself, and I think McShin tries to pretend it's the capital of recovery sometimes.
I am no spokesman, as much as this podcast may perceive that.
Just like I'm hoping John's watching. But no, recovery capital, you got to think about it like the things that we have available to us that help us initiate or sustain a recovery pathway. And I think the important part too is like when we talk about initiating or sustaining a recovery pathway, that we have this fundamental idea that it's not about me having a predetermined outcome of what recovery looks like for you. And we use a lot of terms like abstinence-based, we use moderation-based, medication-based recovery. But to me, it all falls under this umbrella of like, recovery affirming healthcare, right? And so to help a person develop the capital in their life so that they can slowly see like, here's the access to resources that I have. And there's two really important elements of this. One is like oftentimes there's more capital available to us than what we might realize or understand, and we don't know how to navigate those things. The other part is that there's very real equity barriers to those resources for individuals. And so like I might be able to say as a white cisgender person, like I can access all this stuff here in Wisconsin, where there's folks that aren't necessarily have the same level of privilege to access the same capital that I have. So it really varies depending upon who you are and where you are when it comes to having those kind of resources available to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the problem that people have is don't know maybe even the value of these resources that we have, or for example, like a social community is such a huge resource that we either take for granted or don't realize how important it is to have it when we don't have it. For example, that was something that I was missing upon like first getting into recovery. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's really cool. And I hope this is just continuously educational. For example, Angela, I know that your experience with the harm reduction side of things, and I think you were talking about those kind of difficult conversations that might arise, but I think that harm reduction sites are where that is like, I don't know, a catalyst for those conversations where those are really easily happening. Can you kind of explain why that is, or the importance of that conversation happening there on those harm reduction sites?
Yeah, I hope you guys don't mind. It's almost bedtime, so
we love another guest.
Someone's needing a little snuggle. So, I am positive that in many places across the country, harm reduction programming has become the norm, right? And our state agencies are allocating dollars toward it, and they are listening to the research that shows that people that engage in harm reduction programs are more likely to access treatment, and on a continuum will eventually, engage in long-term sustained recovery. However, in the Deep South, that's not the case, right? In Mississippi, the barriers that I've ran into, it's actually illegal for me to open a harm reduction facility here. And so we can't do syringe exchange programs. We can't do testing supplies. We can't do clean supply distribution because it is all considered paraphernalia and is part of our Narcotics Act of 1972 that has not been repealed. So we've come in with bills, numerous ones over the past 4 years to try to have that removed, and they are killed each time. So what that says to us is that we need to back up. Obviously, the right people and enough people are not understanding what the problem is, right? They're not understanding how drug use is exacerbated by punitive measures. And so we at End It for Good, we have tried to zoom all the way out and bringing very basic education and messaging to the citizens across the state and across the Southeast that the war on drugs is essentially making this problem worse. It is not, we're not seeing the outcomes that we intended to have.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely been a step backward, and it's just been hard to kind of overcome. So at least just as a quick anecdote, I had someone here today who recently celebrated like a year clean, and they get the Vivitrol shot, which I would consider, it's not a needle exchange, but I consider it harm reduction in some sort of factor, and said that the ladies there were like, let me see the medallion, because they've been so supportive and ingrained into that person's recovery process. It's so much more symbiotic. It's people who aren't, just a face and a name coming in to get a shot. It's people who create these relationships, get educated on recovery, and a lot of times then they get into recovery, or it's the other way around. So I think they are definitely vital. Jesse, are they a little more fluent in Wisconsin, or kind of like maybe what's your take on harm reduction in general? I know that we all kind of root for it and the blockades to it, but how do we get over them?
Yeah, so what's interesting in Wisconsin. So we had a program called AIDS Resource Center Wisconsin, and for a long time that provided the primary funding for needle and syringe exchange through their programs, in addition to accessing medication, as well as other programs. And so we've had that for quite a long time, even before I was familiar with the term harm reduction. Back in like 2009 and 2010, this program was providing that, and they've just continued to expand it throughout that time period. So I think there's definitely a lot of options for folks here in Wisconsin, but there's also, like we talk about those systemic barriers, and we talk about there were some folks that kind of lobbed the idea out there of an overdose prevention site, or a safe injection site, if you will, right? And of course, folks come marching in and saying like that'll never happen here, but we have more bars per capita in the state of Wisconsin than we have like churches and grocery stores, right? And those are pretty much just unsupervised locations where people are drinking themselves. And then, you look at the fallout from that, right? And alcohol kills more people every year than, opioids and fentanyl and things like that, right? And so it's a much greater problem. So I like what Angela was talking about, like really zooming out to like sometimes like this 101, 5,000 foot level of like, this is good, this is bad. You're not getting the return on investment that you wanted to. But again, gratefully, we have some programs, and we've had some pretty progressive measures that have allowed for, needle exchange and continuing to have that kind of education, and of course access to naloxone, Narcan, and things like that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really important. And Angela, does harm reduction also include that education piece, especially in like a public education sort of system, or is it kind of just like flyers get handed out? I'm kind of curious about what the other part of harm reduction is that we don't always associate with. Because my brain immediately says needle exchange when I hear harm reduction, but I think it's a lot more than that. And I was wondering if it is, to what aspect, at least from your stance.
Yeah. So to me, I would define harm reduction as anything that reduces the harms that come along with substance use, right? So a simple form is medication assisted treatment, right? So that's harm reduction. Narcan distribution and access to naloxone is also harm reduction. But there is a public education piece to it. I actually put together this presentation a couple of months ago and went to the University of Mississippi Medical Center. So this is the medical school in our state, and presented to doctors and defined to them what harm reduction is. And in my presentation, I pulled all these old photographs and did a historical timeline of the development of the automobile, right? And I don't remember, don't quote me on these dates, but somewhere around the late 19th century, around 1880s, the first automobile was sold, and I have the man's name in there. It was sold to him, and he lived in New York. And then in 1891, the first fatality happened from automobiles, because now everyone's driving, and there's no road signs, and there's no stop signs, and there's no red lights. And so we have our first fatality recorded, right? And so over the course of the next 10 to 15 years, traffic signs are invented, and then stoplights are invented. And what are they? They are harm reduction. They're reducing the harms from an inherently dangerous activity. And so I take them through that whole process until we get into the 1980s, and seatbelts now are law. every vehicle must have them. All right. And so again, we are reducing the harms of an inherently dangerous activity that people are going to engage in. And so trying to like take it out of the context of substance use because it's so stigmatized and give it back to them seems like they'll say, okay, well, I can get on board with that. And then we filter it into, so now what does that look like with a population that are using substances?
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with Mike. It's a great analogy, and I agree with everything you said. And one of the things that comes with that is if you're is even like the hypocrites who would say, if you're so worried about driving a car, or what happens when you drive a car, then maybe don't drive a car. And I think like a seatbelt is our Narcan. I mean, it's just like I love analogies, so it like really works out. What, Jesse, do you have anything specifically to the maybe Narcan haters or the ones that think, if I don't want to get in a car accident, then maybe I shouldn't drive a car, maybe walk. That's kind of my metaphor for, if you're worried about an overdose, then don't use type of scenario. I don't know, anything to add there?
I think Angela did such an amazing job with the analogy and probably going to use that. And I think that's really great. I don't know, like I get people will look for any reason to have a complaint about something. People will look for a reason to justify their angle on something. And you spend any time in the Facebook comments on an article around substance use and you see where people are at with it. So it just speaks to the need for ongoing education and not just education, but just like empathy and compassion. Like, where has that gone? Right. And we see the same discussions politically and around masks and around all these other things too. And so I'm just, I think I applaud anyone that goes in and wants to talk to the people, like you said, that are a little bit more resistant. And I've just learned through the years personally, like I spent a lot of years knocking down doors and being like, you need to hear this, you need to understand this. And there was definite change made. And I think that's part of what is really great about the recovery advocacy movement is like leaders are always coming in, learning how to knock down doors with amazing analogies. And then everybody finds their place for it. With Narcan haters, it's really about like, do I want to spend my time with that person on Facebook or in the street talking about it? And what real influence does that person have, right? Like Angela said, regardless of how many people thought seatbelts were going to be against their rights, we have seatbelts, right? Regardless of all these safety measures we currently have, like, our phones don't blow up anymore. They recalled the phones that blow up, right? You don't want a phone that blows up, don't buy a phone. Science and reason, I think, will win out eventually. It's unfortunate that it usually wins out when it costs more money to change it than it does to keep it the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true, especially when things start to develop and become the new norm. That's just the way it is. You're going to get left behind or in the curb, and then you're on the wrong side of history. I think that our current, atmosphere has created a lot of division. I am very, I don't want to hesitant with media in general. Ironically speaking, on a podcast, I think media can be manipulated very easily, and it creates a lot of divisiveness. Angela, do you think it's important that we as a recovery community all agree on the same stuff and have a clear and concise message? Or is it just going to be natural that we're not all going to agree on everything? So we should kind of like stick with our guns on certain things.
Stella says we must all agree on things.
Stella says we must all agree on things.
You heard it from the mouth of babes. So I respect diversity. I never want to feel or go down the path where I feel like I'm the smartest person in the room. And then that was taught to me very early in my recovery. I got sober from forced abstinence in a 12-step program, forced abstinence by drug court. And I made, it was a huge, huge leap for me to get to where I am today, where I see that almost every harm that our society faces is from the war on drugs and from criminalizing substance use. And I actually believe that the way that we are, the way that we're going to decrease the most harms would be to have a legalized and regulated market where anyone who chooses or needs to engage in substance use does so under the care of a doctor, not under the care of a drug dealer. Right. And so that's a whole nother conversation as for what that can look like. But to answer your question, we have to hold space for everyone's opinions. And and you need to, like, the way I try to deal with people who I know don't agree with me or are opposed, who are opposed to our work, is that I practice a harm reduction principle with them. I meet them where they are, and I do not force my beliefs on them. I am respectful. I'm always kind. I'm always engaging, and I hold space, and I try to understand, like, what are their roadblocks. So what I was on a training. It's been a couple of months ago with the people from around the country, and our founder, Christina Dent, we did a book discussion on the book Chasing the Scream. Mm-hmm. And one guy, I cannot remember his name. I think it might have been Michael Crouch, and I think Mike Todd knows him. He said that the visceral response that you get from people, especially people in recovery, when you talk about decriminalizing or legalizing substances, so that's a trauma response for them. And I was like, oh, it is. Because these substances cause massive amounts of pain in their past. And so now here we come along talking about decriminalizing, like, that's super scary to them. Just even that thought can send them, could derail their recovery for some people. And so I have to be considerate of that. I also try to be really considerate of people who have their whole careers have been spent enforcing our current laws, right? So not every law enforcement officer is a terrible person. Not every DA or prosecutor is the devil, or judge that sentences people to prison. They're not all bad, right? I believe if you dig deep down, they all want to do good, and they believe that they're helping. But the laws that they have to enforce are harmful. They're not harmful people. And so what does that look like when you come in a room and you say, we need to decriminalize and we need to get rid of all of these punitive responses to people who use drugs? And so that means their whole life's work could have been wrong. And you have to be careful treading in those waters, and you have to be respectful and kind and consider how they might feel. So that's how we try to approach all of our public facing work, whether it's memes we post on Facebook or words we say in interviews or emails that we send to legislators. Sorry, I think I went off a little bit too far on that.
Please. It's great. It's completely natural. I think what you're saying is super valid. It's definitely something that would take a lot of brevity. I got done with a unit of justice theory class, and the way you're talking is almost exactly on that level, where it's very anti-rules, going toward values. It's very like less hierarchical, more like community. I mean, it's definitely moving from a punitive system to a unitive system. And even the way you say holding space for people, I can tell that you've like done your research, and you've definitely, like, I don't know, been involved in a very communal setting, because that's what the thing is a lot of people want to solve problems instead of hold space for people to solve their own problems, just like on a conflict resolution tip. But at the exact same time, the word decriminalization, just as a straight up semantic, makes me think this isn't a crime anymore. You know what I'm saying? So it's like defelonization, it just like affects people in a different way because of that trauma that you're talking about. I think that was really, really well said. I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole, but I think what you're talking about is essentially the Portugal model in the U.S. Jesse, is that like a good idea?
I think we just saw that happen in Oregon, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Happy decriminalization day. I think the folks at the club there. Yeah, I think I saw Brent Cano post it was today.
That's right.
And I think they're going to make like holiday cards for every year, so you can like send out holiday cards. At least that would be great if it was, right? So just again, like to follow up, I mean, Angela just said it so concisely, right? Like it's hard to talk about it like, you know, seeing the forest from the trees kind of a thing, right? Like we're in the system that's not working, so it's hard to see and it's hard to validate other systems that could work and possibly work when your entire life is surrounded by this. And to kind of back up what you said, like, you know, substance use disorder and mental health, it's the way that it's been woven into the criminal justice system as being like the only medical issues that you try to punish people out of with prison time, right? Like, you know, oh, you've had like remission, like your cancer's come back, maybe some time in jail will help you be better at not having cancer, right? Like it just sounds absurd and insane. And so I think like, you know, trying to pose it to people like that, but when we talk about decriminalization and then, you know, again, for me, I have the discussions, well, tell me then why you're for the current legalization of alcohol and tobacco. And tell me about that. And tell me the amount of money that we spend on millions and millions of dollars we spend on people that are hurt by that, right? And so how is it any different than that, you know? We just give people more access to it. And so I think, again, like you said, Angela, like finding those touch points where like help them relate and identify with current world standings and how this could work the same way with it. And then working through that educational component. And then, you know, again, at the end of the day, like people are going to find and seek these substances no matter what. And I think that's part of the conversation, but then going further down the stream and like, well, why are people seeking the substances? And then, so what are we doing about prevention efforts that include talking about trauma and include addressing the systems that allow for trauma to happen in and of the first place, so that they end up seeing substances as a way of coping with those things, right? So I think there's larger systematic conversations that need to happen with these things. And the decriminalization, legalization of substances is just like, you know what, in a couple of years, pot's going to be legal across the country, right? Just, you know, get ready, right? Yeah. Buy some stock, whatever. That seems to be the thing kids are doing these days.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen, right? Like, you know, and for my own personal story, like when we talk about like, well, the long-term effects, right? I had a harder time detoxing from the antidepressant meds I was given during recovery than I did, you know, cold detoxing off of crack in jail, right? Like that was, I mean, I slept a lot, but, you know, so again, like really trying to bring some reality to these situations. And Johann Hari's second book, After Chasing the Scream, is called Lost Connections. And he talks about how the pharmaceutical industry skews test results so that certain meds will be passed and that more people will take them, right? And so then it blows the whole lid off of that thing, right? You know, of course, 47% people got better. You only had 2 people in the study, right? So it really looks at, again, like, what are the meds that they're making? What are the meds that we're fighting against? Why are we fighting against them? Are there skewed perspectives? There's a ton of skewed data, and it's a big uphill climb, but I think it's worthwhile.
So how do you do that, Angela? Is that like a step-by-step process? Does it start with a grassroots thing, or do you go big and then work small, or do you go the other way around? I mean, you know, different strategies, but I think I don't know.
I think I am by no means the expert. Still is the expert around here, but you know, I think that all meaningful change has happened began at a grassroots level. Mm-hmm. And you know, I have a feeling that you could trace back some of our most monumental social advances, and there will be the people that Google tells you take credit for it, you know, or like the president who signs it into law. But if you follow that movement back, you're going to find a group of normal, everyday citizens like Jesse and you and Randy and Mike Todd. And those people were the driving force to gain this momentum. Yes, it always starts grassroots. And then later on down the road, someone else will take credit for it. And that's fine. We don't care. We just want change to happen.
No, that's a great attitude.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mean to cut you off or anything.
No, I was just going to kind of dive into, a friend of mine, when I came back from Mobilize Recovery, Christina, the founder of End It for Good, who's a dear friend of mine, and now we work together. We had lots of conversations about the conversations we had at Mobilize Recovery and some of the challenges that were put before us when we were in Vegas in 2019. And so from us talking through it, we decided, we don't want to preach to the choir, because whether or not, you're in recovery from this and you did it abstinence-based or you did it non-abstinence-based, whatever, I feel that we're all a collective. And what we need to be doing, instead of talking to each other, we need to be outward facing, talking to the people who view themselves as different from us, or view themselves as removed from the conversation. Mm-hmm. So, I spend a lot of time talking to soccer moms who in their daily lives don't have a dog in this hunt, and have never even considered why our drug laws are harmful. And they feel very removed from the issue. And it's like, and then once you explain it to them, they're full of empathy and they're full of compassion. They're like, oh, well, that makes sense. And no, if that happens to my kid, I don't want him to go to prison. So of course we need to decriminalize this stuff, and then we spend a lot of time talking to teachers, and we call Chamber of Commerces, and we talk to the business community, and yes, we do talk to legislators and police chiefs and all of those different kind of people who if you don't go and directly engage them, then they get to remain on the outside of the conversation. So that would be my challenge to anyone who's listening and wanting to do something. Is go have conversations with people who are not part of the pack, right? Mm-hmm. Go talk to people who aren't
that are part of the herd.
Yeah, they are part of the herd. Thank you.
So, yeah,
they should get in it. But I think that actually is really good advice. Me, you, and Jesse can sit around talking about all the things that we all agree on and know. But I don't know how productive that is all the time, which is why I like having people I don't see all the time in the conversation in general. You know what I'm saying? And asking, I don't know, somewhat divisive questions if I can, or as a devil's advocate and just to try to evoke a conversation. Jesse, you've had your hands in a lot of pies, to my understanding, throughout your recovery journey. You've kind of been everywhere doing everything. Can you explain, I don't know, some of the things that you've been most passionate about and some of the, better successes or achievements that have made you especially proud as one of these people in the grassroots movement?
One, I love that saying. What is it? They didn't have a dog in this hunt. That's great. I'm
that was my grandpa just snuck out.
That was good stuff. Yeah, because I'm what's the Wisconsin equivalent to that? I don't know. I don't have a cheese in this beer, something like that. So, but to your, I guess I want to kind of talk a little bit about the change piece too, because so previous to starting up a small business, Helios Recovery, and so I worked for a place called Harmony Cafe. So it was a program. So our Goodwill Industries all goodwills get assigned a certain area within a state or a jurisdiction, and our goodwill covers about 36 counties across the middle of Wisconsin. And they started up this program called Harmony Cafe in 2006, and it basically was a community hub for live music, for support groups, for diversity conversations. Like it was where it was at. And then eventually there was an LGBT youth support group called the Partnership that moved into it as well. And in 2006 and 2007, when I joined AmeriCorps, which was probably the best year of my professional life, being a part of runaway outreach services for AmeriCorps, I was a co-facilitator, then eventually took over the LGBT youth programs for Northeast Wisconsin and worked with a lot of coalitions and groups. And what I saw, especially from like 2009 to 2013, the amount of progress that happened in our state. And what was interesting is like they started shifting the conversation. Like, yeah, we knew LGBTQ youth were 200-300 times more likely, suicide attempts, mental health issues, suicide, pregnancy, right? And we had those stats and we knew it was painful. But then what came along was really fascinating is they said, you know what? Adult LGBTQ people also constitute for about $80 million in tapped revenue in the state of Wisconsin. And then all of a sudden, all the chamber's ears perked up. They're like, there's this group of people and no one's advertising to them. And so I love watching innovative models. I love watching how buzzwords change. I love watching how trends come and go. And so it got me thinking like, well, what about the unprecedented amount of money of people? Because I make up that people in recovery are extremely loyal to brands that are loyal to them, right? That's why we get all the things that we get. Imagine if not only was the recovery community like this constituency that we could sway politically, but also like it was one that was marketed to, right? Then you would start to see how things change. If you went and said like, if you see X amount of people enter the recovery community, and if they stay in recovery, whatever that pathway is for 6 months, they need to spend their money on stuff, right? And it's going to be more than energy drinks and cigarettes. They want to spend it on things. So I think one of the most successful things I saw was and had a small part in like the city of Appleton became the place that first offered domestic partner benefits at a city level. And again, that didn't impact the youth I was working with on a weekly basis because we talked a lot about LGBTQ specific history and safer sex education, but the indirect impact of a city saying like, we're safe now, right? Like it just relieved what we would call like the toxic stress that they experience on a regular basis. And they're like, now they view Appleton as a safe city. And then you started seeing businesses putting rainbows on the outside of everything, right? And so you saw the sway happen. Now, granted, this movement's been happening since the 60s with Stonewall, where women of color like started this whole thing, right? And it's been built on their shoulders. And then again, when it started impacting, and then it swayed into, well, now there's money opportunities. And unfortunately, I think a lot of it comes back to that. So I've had the chance to be a part of a couple cool things, help, with some legislation introduction, but really my passion, like I got to train recovery coaches last week, and they're going to go impact hundreds of people. And if I can go in there and talk about being compassionate, meet people where they're at, talk about harm reduction, talk about like you need to get ahead of the curve on all this stuff, and really just try to somewhat soapbox in education to them, that just means a ton. I love seeing that work, and I love seeing people go through that process and go out there and make something out of their lives and their recovery and meet people where they're at.
No, I absolutely agree. I bet you're a much more experienced and better trainer than I am, but I got to do the exact same thing last week to some people that came down from Connecticut, like all the way from and the exact same thing, training recovery coaches. So like it's super cool. One, that we can have a conversation like this, Virginia, Wisconsin, and Mississippi, this in-depth and cogent, but the fact that we can also be doing similar, almost identical things for the recovery community in our own little way in different areas. And then it all just creates this big, for lack of a better term, like melting pot of, success. I just think it's like really beautiful. So I'm getting so much education throughout this whole thing. I'm loving it.
Can I ask Angela a question?
Please,
Yeah.
please. This is dialogue.
You like so the recovery coaching harm reduction pathway.
Mhm.
Have you done that? I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it.
I have not done it. So I have in Mississippi, it is peer support specialist, certified peer support specialist through the Department of Mental Health, and I'm a trainer for them.
Nice.
We had our last training in December. So I consider one of my biggest victories of 2020 was the director of the Alcohol and Drug Services asked me to be a trainer for the recovery focused peer support training, and I tweaked the curriculum some, and he let me insert Johan Hari's TED Talk into this. So it's like on day one, they're getting introduced to bigger causes of addiction rather than what they might have just been fed in treatment. So no, I have not done the harm reduction recovery coach training. I'd love to. Does Helios do that?
I've been talking with Jim Wolfing, who was one of the creators of the curriculum, and looking to hopefully get in on one of the trainings soon. I feel like there's just so much innovation opportunity in all these areas. And again, to really treat people like in this pathway and to be able to get those things out there. So if I'm training it ever, I'll let you know. But if I hear of a training, I'll definitely both know as well.
Yes, please do. I'd love to join.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess as a larger question, how do you guys get access to these trainings, or how can you recommend people watching this find these resources to trainings? Because, we can sit here and try to like educate as much as possible in a fun dialogue like this. But I think anyone else like me, I need to sit down and focus on like a training if I want to like maybe synthesize the information that can make it applicable. Do y'all have any recommendations to those watching and how to like find any of these Like, I know that's kind of a huge question, but like, how do you find some of this stuff? Jesse, you look like you got a smart bond.
So, Jesse and Randy are my go-to when I'm trying to see what the new trainings on the horizons are. So I think I'll let him answer to trainings, but then I'll give you guys some input on just virtual education events that are not training specific.
Yeah, because from my experience, it feels like it's just like networking, like knowing the right person doing a training.
Yeah.
Well, and it's really important too. Like, and so, once upon a time, early in recovery, I took a career development and analysis class, and they do like Myers-Briggs professional astrology stuff, and like you kind of find out like you should be this or that kind of a thing. And I feel like the amount of people when I was in treatment that wanted to go out and be substance use counselors really wanted to see like their experience as sponsors just being paid for it, right? And so like if you're considering becoming a recovery coach or a peer, like there's a lot of different kind of things you got to consider, right? One, you got to think like, well, is this a certification I want so I can be billable in my state? Is it that I want to go and pursue a curriculum that really speaks to me, and then I want to get that certification from them so that I'm employable in different places or maybe for them, right? And then there's like national and international certifications that you can carry with you. So the Wisconsin State certification, peer specialist certification is great here, but it doesn't travel anywhere else, right? Whereas other states recognize each other's trainings. The CCAR model, which I'll plug here. So Randy Anderson and I will be offering the Recovery Coach Training Academy in April. I believe, I know he's watching, the 19th through the 24th. And we do 4 days of the RCA, but we also do 2 days of ethics, which we think is really important for recovery coaches to understand this lane and role. And I'm not like, this is just the pathway that spoke to me. I took the training back in 2014, and this was when I was still with Goodwill, because I had kind of my foot in two worlds. And so I was seeing like in the 12-step community, like people kind of talking about and not understanding how to navigate services and access things, right? And then at Harmony Cafe, like I knew of hundreds of nonprofits and I could just access them. Like, this is how you do that, right? So I pitched a program to do recovery case management, and then it ended up becoming they paid for me to go get trained as a coach, and I've been training ever since. again, like, this is just the model that I think works really well, and I think gels into recovery community organizations really well. There are other models that gel better into like county service models or medical based models. And again, it's just about doing your research and finding out what does it mean to you, and how do you want to use it in your career, either to be a paid person or just to have the letters after your last name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, at least like in Virginia, we have like the certified peer recovery specialist. It's kind of like is like our certification or whatever. But what exactly that means and what they do as paid employees is like, it's kind of here and there. You know what I'm saying? Like ideally, it would be. I think there should be they just have different jobs at different things. It's kind of not like a one size fits all. You know what I'm saying? When I hear CPRS, I imagine someone who should be at least in a hospital there when someone just comes back from like an OD or something like that. Like that's what I envision should be the role. And as someone in this community, there aren't like paid CPRS jobs. It's usually that on top of some other responsibility, or it's like a credential in general. It's not an actual like you get paid to be a peer recovery specialist. What does that even mean? Like as a role of a recovery coach, I do one-on-ones with people, but that's kind of like an on top of my job doing the medication and the drug screens. It's like the recovery community is so like worn thin with finances that there aren't even like paid jobs for CPRSs or stuff like that. And it sounds kind of like that's what you were experiencing, Jesse, because you were doing this Harmony Cafe stuff as well on top of, it just feels like that has to be a lot going on, I don't know, to get paid for it. In short, maybe I'm being greedy or whatever, but I don't do it for the money at all. I do it for my own personal recovery, frankly, and to give back to the community. And I think that also comes in to play in, say, like an ethics training. If I'm being honest, ethics was the part of the test that I did the worst on, because it's not as inherent as people think it is. Is ethics maybe harder to understand to people in recovery because we're so, I don't know, maybe unethical when we're in active addiction? Angela? Or is that just me? Maybe it's completely and entirely me, but
no. So I think, well,
I took the long way to get to that question.
Yeah.
But.
Well, my experience with ethics, they weren't hard, but they were scary. It was scary to me because one of the pieces of myself that I thought I lost through active addiction was integrity. And I was, by the time I got out of jail the last time and went to treatment, I was, just beat down and thought that maybe whatever integrity that I might have been taught as a child or had at one point in my life was just gone. And I really didn't understand what the hell was wrong with me. And so that regaining that and rebuilding that value system again in my life, and like having it be the most forward facing value that I can give to people has been really, really important to me. But because of that, in early recovery, when you're talking about ethics, and I'm going to my first peer support training, and I had like maybe a year sober, and they're talking about ethics, and I'm like, oh God, I broke all the rules in my active addiction. Like what ethics? It was all about me. So I don't know that I would say that it's hard. I would say that it's scary. And yeah.
Jesse, what are your thoughts?
I never really thought about ethics prior to an ethics training. I was just like, it was one of those things that I'm like, I don't know. Like I've been around cars all my life, but I've never learned anything about them. I couldn't tell you what does what. It was just kind of there. And then, after training for so long and people started really bringing up this ethics thing, I'm like, yeah, I should probably. And then I'm like, oh, these are, like you said, like these are just like professional values in a sense, right? And so then, through organizations and through different things, like just really learning and understanding the importance of ethics, I think it is a good thing. And I think that, again, when we trust people, and we err on the side of like really valuing people, like they'll understand ethics, and they'll get why it's important to have these things collectively. And as we've seen, even within our own recovery community, right? Like there's a spectrum of ethics as to what's okay with, behavior, how people get leadership positions, where you take money from. There's just like a gamut, right? Yeah. And, at the end of the day, it's like, what can you live with, right? What can you walk away with and still be you with, and I think that's what helps with ethics, just starting that conversation of what those things mean, because we're never going to agree on all of them.
No, I think that's very fair. And it reminds me of when you said that some people who were taking, peer specialist, recovery coach classes because they wanted to be a paid sponsor. That doesn't work. You know what I'm saying? Because a sponsor is not always the most ethical person. At least from different stories. I love my sponsor personally, but they aren't exactly always the most ethical person, and they always think they're right. And a recovery coach should not always think they're right. It's kind of just like helping with resources. You know what I'm saying? So I think that it might be an important factor or example of how like ethics can work in recovery, versus like maybe a professional realm of recovery. Is that what are my final? Yeah, Angela.
I have a question that popped into my mind listening to you say that. Jesse, have you ever distinguished in classes or trainings that you do, the difference between a recovery coach and a sponsor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of the first things we talk about.
And what's your answer for that?
Well, there's in the Recovery Coach Academy for CCAR, there's an entire chart that distinguishes the lane between coach, sponsor, and counselor, and talks about like framework, hierarchical understanding, ideology, philosophy, like it goes to the whole thing. And then there was another article that was written about distinguishing the roles between a peer and a recovery coach, because there's even distinctions between those two. And if I remember, and if you remind me, I can send you that paper too on those things. Because again, like I see a coach, grassroots, working at McShin, doing those things. I see a peer specialist, like you said, like in those more like therapeutic counseling settings, and like they just had different roles and understandings. But last night I was doing a thing over on in the rooms, and I had one of the coordinators for the peer specialist curriculum on. And it was interesting because his idea of between a coach and a peer was like he was describing a coach to me, and then what I try to train. So there's a lot of like this nuanced overlap between the two, but there's a very clear line between us being sponsors and not being sponsors. So that's a very important part of the curriculum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always like try to dig down and just like, we don't, as peers, we're not working steps with you. Your sponsor can do that.
Yeah, for sure. And I've understand like, and you've mentioned it a lot tonight, Jesse, which is very helpful. The pathways is like a piece, like at least here, recovery coaches are supposed to say, here are all the different pathways. You can pick which either one. It's not like pick NA, it's the only way to recover type stuff. I think that's a really important asset, is that I learned honestly daily of like a different pathway to recovery, just as that kind of is one. And I think that's really vital that people have options. It's like, I don't know, maybe that's why it's called recovery capital, because we get all these options, and that's the perfect version of capitalism. not to like get economical or anything like that, but it's like recovery capital makes sense. It's kind of like a free market. I can pick whichever way to recover. Jesse, Yeah, Angela, please.
I wanted to come back to the topics of events. I put in the chat box, and I think Todd's going to post on the feed some events that we have coming up with End It for Good. So on Thursday of this week, we are hosting a virtual book discussion of Chasing the Scream, and Johan Hari is going to guide it for us.
That's awesome.
So excited. So I'm totally gonna fangirl out. And then on February 11th and February 25th, we are having virtual community discussions, and anyone is welcome to join. They're like lunch and learns. And so we come in, and Christina will do her TEDx presentation where we look at the history of the war on drugs and how it is causing harm across the spectrum. And then we look at some different ways. We look at Portugal, we look at what they've done in Switzerland, and we talk a little bit about Oregon. So the links for those events are in the chat box, and please, anyone who wants to come and learn more, sign up. They're free.
Definitely.
Send those
listening,
yes.
Yeah. Anyone that's listening right now might listen to this afterward. That's enditforgood.com/events.
Yes.
Enditforgood.com/events. It sounds very informative. Like this, the gift that keeps on giving information. I really appreciate that. Any final thoughts before we wrap up here, Jesse?
Final thoughts. It was I really appreciate the opportunity to come on here and get in the herd. I feel like I've earned some like a punch on my recovery card, like I've done what the cool kids are doing. So that's awesome. Yeah, right. No, I think for those listening or to listen, I think the biggest thing is my hope and something that dawned on me like a couple of weeks ago. I said, if you don't think that the recovery community is capable of making amazing change, think about the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? You cannot go into a building that's not compliant today, right? Yeah. And if you think about what we could do and say like, well, what would it look like for a workspace or a community to be recovery compliant in that same way, right? And it's possible. So again, enough with asking permission to be at someone's table. If there's really 23 million or 25 million people in recovery, we have a large enough table, right? We just got to narrow our scope a little bit. And the way that I suggest doing that is not necessarily by one leader or influencer or organization thinking that they have it. But I think that it should be more of like the last thing, and I'm sorry for going over, but one of the most profound things in 12-step recovery I experienced was when they were doing modifications to the basic text, and the modification suggestions came all the way down to the group level. We voted on them, then to our area, then to our region, then all the way back to world headquarters, right? So imagine if we had the ways and means to bring that voting of who our leaders are all the way down to the RC level, all the way down to the group level. We vote on, here's the policies that are important, right? Not just top down, here's what we think you should do because we're watching stuff from DC for you, but really bring it down to a voting strategy. I think that we could have a lot more cohesion and effort and be able to make a lot more policy change that way.
Good stuff. I think that is a great example for how to, do some serious change. Thank you very much, Jesse. Any other final thoughts, Angela?
I echo what Jesse says, and I just feel incredibly empowered all the time when I can look out and I see the work that they're doing in Wisconsin. I see the work that Garrett and Ryan are doing. I look at the work Jenna's doing in Texas and Mike's doing in South Carolina, and it's just, even though I haven't seen these people in over a year, it's the the community that I feel and the empowerment that I feel because of it is incredible. And it drives me, like, even with the daunting task of trying to do something crazy in red state Mississippi. It's like the community that these people have provided me just gives me just enough empowerment to feel like, you know what, hell with it, I'm going to do it. So I'm grateful. All of that to say, Jesse, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all your amazing work, and my heart goes out to you as well. I've been watching on your Facebook posts and know that there's been some loss and some, yeah. I'm so glad that you're able to make it tonight, and thanks for still doing what you're doing and knowing that folks are holding space for you.
Thank you very much.
That's beautiful. I really appreciate having y'all on. Very compassionate, intelligent leaders of change, and so I'm very fortunate to help give y'all a platform to do that, educate our audience, and more importantly, educate me, because I feel very out of the loop sometimes. So I really appreciate having you on. Big shout out to our producer, Todd. We definitely would like to have you all on again. Angela, Jesse, thanks again. Shout out to Todd. Y'all have a wonderful night. This has been Get in the Herd. Peace out. Love you guys.
See ya.
My name is Shannon Lance. I'm currently here in recovery at McShin Foundation. I got out of jail on January 10th, 2021. And while I was incarcerated there, my mother passed away due to COVID complications on December 14th. It was a really challenging event in my life. While I was incarcerated there, I watched the recovery videos and the podcast on the tablets there, that was made by the McShin Foundation. Getting the Herd podcast is really made me feel like I was a part of something on the outside, because, there's people that are commenting and just seeing, people that I was incarcerated with on the videos, and just thinking, man, that's going to be me, before too long. And, I'm going to be sitting there in them rooms and, be able to be a part of the podcast and Get in the Herd series. And, now I'm a part of the Herd here at McShin, and it's an amazing feeling, and it's nice having a fulfilled sense of hope in my life currently, and just to live one day at a time, and just to have positive feelings in my life and good relationships with my family and friends is an amazing event.